I quietly removed my son from my will on a Tuesday morning, and I didn't tell a soul, not my neighbors, not my pastor, not even my oldest friend, who has known me since we were both young mothers pushing strollers down the same sidewalk. I drove myself to my attorney's office, sat across from him, signed what needed to be signed, and then I went to the grocery store and bought a rotisserie chicken and a bunch of tulips for the kitchen table. I drove home. I fed my cat, and I felt, for the first time in a long while, like I could breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. People will want to know how a mother gets to that place. I understand that. I'd have wanted to know too once. So, let me start from the beginning, because nothing about that Tuesday was sudden. It had been years in the making. Years I spent telling myself I was imagining things, that I was too sensitive, that this was just how modern families worked, and I needed to keep up. My son's name is Theo. He was born in October, 41 years ago, during a rainstorm that knocked out the power to our whole street. My husband and I drove to the hospital with a flashlight in my lap. I remember thinking, as I watched the streetlights disappear one by one, that this baby was already making an entrance. And he did, loud and red-faced and absolutely certain the world owed him attention. I loved that about him, once. His father passed when Theo was 32. A cardiac event, swift and without warning, on a Wednesday afternoon in the driveway. I won't go into the details of that grief here because it is not the story I'm telling today. But I will say this. Losing my husband remade me. When you are with someone for 38 years and then one afternoon they are simply gone, you discover very quickly what you are made of. I found out I was made of something sturdier than I had ever given myself credit for. I sold the big house, bought a smaller one I could manage myself, and I figured out how to live. Theo was attentive at first, calling every few days, coming by on Sundays for dinner, bringing his wife, Nadine, who had always been polite in the careful way that people are polite when they are performing politeness rather than feeling it. I noticed, but I told myself I was projecting. Grief does that. It makes you suspicious of warmth because you've been reminded that warmth can disappear. Nadine came from money. Not old money, but the kind of money that announces itself. The nice car, the vacations posted to social media, the way she spoke about other people's houses in a tone that was technically complimentary, but somehow managed to make you feel like you were being evaluated. She was not unkind to me in those early years. She just never quite let me in. And then my grandchildren arrived. First a girl, Emmy, and then 2 years later, a boy they named Grant. And I want to tell you that those children softened everything. They softened Nadine, or so I thought. They softened whatever small frictions existed between us. When Emmy was a baby, I kept her 2 days a week, while Theo and Nadine both worked. I changed diapers and sang old songs and pushed that little girl through the park in a stroller until she fell asleep with her fist pressed against her cheek. I did the same for Grant. Those were some of the best years of my life. I didn't charge them for childcare. I want to say that plainly. I'm not saying it to receive credit. I'm saying it because later, when I tried to understand how we arrived where we did, I kept turning the facts over, trying to find where the line was crossed. The childcare was one part of it. Then came the years of helping with their down payment on the new house. Then the loan that was never repaid. Then the request for help with the business Theo wanted to start, which I gave partially, setting aside the rest as I had privately planned. None of this was done resentfully. I did it because he was my son, and because I had the resources, and because I believed, genuinely believed, that family helps family. But somewhere in the back of my mind, in the place where I put things I didn't want to examine too closely, I knew that the help had become expected, that the calls on holidays were shorter, that Nadine had stopped asking me about my own life and had begun speaking at me instead of to me, updating me on their news the way you update a distant relative who exists at the edge of your awareness. I noticed when they stopped inviting me to Emmy's school events. I noticed when the Sunday dinners became monthly, and then occasional, and then something we discussed but rarely scheduled. I noticed when I called Theo on a random Thursday just to hear his voice and he picked up distracted, said, "Mom, can I call you back?" and then called back 4 days later with no acknowledgement of the gap. I noticed all of this. I filed it away. I told myself I was being needy. I told myself I was adjusting poorly to being alone and projecting my loneliness onto people who had full lives and full schedules and couldn't be expected to center me. I really did tell myself all of that. Last Christmas, my son and his wife hosted dinner at their home, the home I had helped them afford. I was told dinner was at 3. I arrived at 2:30 with a lemon cake I had baked from scratch, a recipe I have been making since Theo was a little boy and would request it for every birthday. I also brought gifts for Emmy and Grant and a poinsettia for the table because I didn't want to arrive empty-handed. I knocked. I heard noise inside. Someone turned down the volume on something. Then the door opened, and it was Nadine. She looked at me for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. "We're doing immediate family this year," she said. "Just the 4 of us. I thought Theo told you." I stood on their porch with a lemon cake and a poinsettia and gifts wrapped in paper with little silver stars. "He didn't tell me," I said. She tilted her head the way people do when they're pretending to feel bad about something. "Oh, well, I'm sorry for the confusion. We just really needed a quiet Christmas. You understand." I understood that I was standing outside my son's house on Christmas Day, having driven 40 minutes in holiday traffic. I understood that my grandchildren were inside that house. I understood that Nadine had called me the confusion. I said something short and controlled. I don't even remember exactly what because my brain had gone to that distant, muffled place it goes when something genuinely stunning is happening. I held out the poinsettia. She took it. I kept the cake and the gifts. I walked back to my car. I sat in the driveway for a moment. I could see the lights on their Christmas tree through the window. I had helped pay for that house. I had spent 4 years watching their children so they could work. I drove home. Theo called me that evening. His voice had the particular tone it gets when he's been coached. Measured and slightly formal, the way it sounds when Nadine has scripted the conversation in advance. He told me that they were trying to create new traditions, that Nadine felt their family needed a dedicated space just for the 4 of them during the holidays, that he hoped I understood. I asked him if he had known before Christmas Day that I was not invited. There was a pause. "We talked about it a few weeks ago," he said. I thought Nadine had reached out. She had not reached out. I told him I had been at his door with a cake I baked myself. He said he was sorry about that. He said it the way people say, "I'm sorry for your loss," which is a phrase that's really about closing the subject rather than opening it. I said good night. I went to bed at 8 o'clock in the evening on Christmas Day, and I lay in the dark for a long time without sleeping. What I was thinking about was not anger, or rather, anger was there, but underneath it was something else, something quieter and more fundamental. I was thinking about how long I had been folding myself smaller, how long I had been translating bad behavior into misunderstandings, reframing cruelty as miscommunication, making room for everyone else's comfort at the cost of my own. I thought about my husband, who would have been furious. He had no tolerance for people who treated kindness as weakness. I could hear him as clearly as if he were in the room. "Don't let them do this to you." 3 weeks later, Theo called me on a Sunday afternoon. His voice was different, easier. The scripted quality was gone, replaced by the particular lightness he gets when he wants something. He told me that he and Nadine had an opportunity. A business her brother was involved in. An investment that required bringing in a small number of early partners at a significant sum, but the return potential was, he said, exceptional. I let him talk. I asked how much. He named a number that was not small. I asked when he needed an answer. By the end of the week, he said. These windows didn't stay open. I said I would think about it. "Mom," he said, with a little laugh that was meant to be disarming, "you've always been the one person I can count on." After we hung up, I sat with my coffee at the kitchen table, and I thought about that sentence. "You've always been the one person I can count on." He said it like it was a compliment. He said it like it was a gift he was giving me, and perhaps once I would have received it that way. Perhaps once that sentence would have made me feel essential and loved and connected. Now I heard it differently. Now I heard it as the thing it actually was. The following week I did not call him with an answer about the investment. Instead, I called my attorney, whose name is Howard, a man in his 60s with a calm face and the patient, steady manner of someone who has heard every variety of human complication and has stopped being surprised by any of it. I told him I wanted to update my estate documents. I told him I wanted to discuss the structure of anything left to my grandchildren so that it bypassed their parents entirely, administered by a third party until the children were adults. He did not blink. He asked good questions. He took notes. By the time I left his office, my will had been remade, a small amount to a charitable organization in my late husband's name, a fund set aside for Emmy and Grant, structured so that Theo and Nadine could not touch it or direct it. The rest, which was not an insignificant amount, redirected. I went to the grocery store. I bought a rotisserie chicken and some tulips. I went home. I want to be honest about what that period felt like, because I think people assume a decision like this comes with a certain hardness, a coldness, a closing off of feeling. But it wasn't like that. It felt like something had been set down, something I had been carrying for so long that I'd stopped noticing the weight of it. And then I set it down on Howard's conference table, and I walked out without it. I did not stop loving my son. I want to say that too, because it is true. But I stopped letting that love require me to disappear. Theo called twice the following week about the investment. I let the calls go to voicemail. Both messages were cheerful in a way that was slightly too cheerful. I did not return them. He called a third time on a Saturday. This time I picked up. I said I had decided not to contribute to the investment. He was quiet. Then he said, "Mom, this was a real opportunity. Nadine's brother is not going to hold this open forever." I said I understood that. "Is something wrong?" he asked. And the question was so strange to me, so perfectly sealed off from everything that had actually happened, that I didn't know where to begin. He was asking me if something was wrong, as if Christmas Day had not occurred. As if I had not stood on his porch with a cake I baked myself and been told I was immediate family only in theory. I said, very quietly, that several things had been wrong for a while. Another silence. Then his voice changed. He became the coached version of himself again, and he told me that Nadine felt I had always had difficulty respecting their boundaries, that my expectations were not always realistic, that they loved me but needed me to understand that their family had to come first. I asked him to name a specific example of me failing to respect their boundaries. He could not name one. What he said instead was that Nadine found my presence a lot sometimes, and that she needed space to build her own family traditions, and that he hoped I could find it in myself to support that. I took a breath. I said, "I have supported you your entire life. I would like you to sit with that." Then I said goodbye and ended the call. He did not call back that day, or the next. Nadine called 4 days later. I did not recognize the number at first, and when I heard her voice, there was a half second where I almost softened, because reflexes are powerful things, and I had spent years being soft toward this woman in the hope that she would eventually soften back. She said she wanted to clear the air. I told her I was listening. She said she felt I didn't have healthy expectations of what her family could provide emotionally. She used the phrase healthy expectations twice. She said my son worried about me, that it was a lot of pressure to feel like your parent needed you to be their primary emotional support. She said all of this in a voice that sounded like a podcast, smooth and therapeutic, and completely disconnected from anything that had actually occurred between us. I waited until she was done. Then I said, "Your children are partially educated because of me. Your house exists because of me. I have never once asked your husband to be my primary emotional support. I have asked to be included in my grandchildren's lives." There was a long pause. Then she said, "I think you have a different memory of things than we do." I said, "I'm sure that's true." We ended the call shortly after that. What came next surprised me. Not from them. From myself. I did not spiral. I did not lie awake reconstructing every conversation, which is what I would have done in an earlier version of my life. I did not compose letters I would never send. I did not eat badly or stop walking or call my friend at midnight to process the whole thing out loud. I had a grief that was real and contained. I missed my grandchildren. I missed who I had believed my son to be, or perhaps who he had been before he became the person who could have his mother stand on his porch on Christmas Day and not call until evening. I let myself miss those things without turning the missing into bargaining. I began to be more intentional about my days. I had a garden I had been neglecting, and I started giving it attention again. I signed up for a ceramics class at the community center, which I had been meaning to do for years. I cooked dinner properly instead of eating crackers over the sink. I visited my friend more often, and she came to me, and we did the thing we've always done, which is talk about everything and nothing in the way that only very long friendships allow. I was not performing happiness, I was choosing it, which is different and harder and also more durable. Then one afternoon in March, my son called me from a number I didn't know. I almost didn't answer, but I did. His voice was different from any version I had heard in a long time. He was not coached. He was not cheerful. He sounded like Theo at 15, which is to say he sounded young and uncertain and a little afraid. He told me he had found out about the will. I don't know how. I had not told anyone, and my attorney certainly had not. My best guess is that it came through some secondary source, some document or conversation that found its way to the surface. These things happen in ways you don't always track, he said. Mom, is it true? I said, yes. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I could hear him breathing. Why didn't you tell me? I said, because I made a private decision about my own estate. I wasn't obligated to announce it. But he stopped, started again. We're your family. You are, I said. And I love you. That hasn't changed. Then why? Because love and inheritance are separate things. I spent years loving you and being very generous with that love, in every form it can take. And last Christmas, I stood on your porch holding a cake that I baked for you, because I have been baking it for you since you were 7 years old. And your wife told me I wasn't included. And you called that evening and managed to apologize without calling it what it was. Silence. I didn't handle that well, he said finally, and it was the first honest thing he had said to me in a long time. Not scripted, not therapeutic language, just a flat statement of fact that cost him something to say. No, I agreed. You didn't. We talked for a while after that. Not a reconciliation. Not a scene from a movie where everything resolves into warmth and clarity. Just a conversation, careful and raw in places, that covered some ground we had not covered before. He told me things were difficult at home. I did not take that as an explanation, but I listened. He said he felt caught between two people he loved. I told him that feeling caught was a choice he had made, and that it would continue to be a choice until he made a different one. Before we hung up, he asked if I would be willing to see Emmy and Grant. I told him I had never stopped being willing to see Emmy and Grant. We scheduled a lunch for the following Saturday. Just me and the children, a restaurant they liked that had very good French fries, which I know because Grant has told me 3 separate times in our last 3 phone calls that this particular place has the best French fries in the world, and he is 8 years old, so I trust his authority on this. Nadine did not come. I didn't ask why, and I didn't need to know. I sat across from my grandchildren, and Emmy showed me a drawing she had done at school, and Grant ate an alarming quantity of French fries, and I had the thought that sitting here in this ordinary booth on this ordinary Saturday, watching these 2 children grow into themselves, this was what mattered. Not the house, not the loan, not the investment I hadn't made, not even the will, which was simply a document, a piece of paper that reflected my values and my decisions and no one else's. This was what mattered. Theo texted me the evening after the lunch. It said they had a really good time. Thank you. I wrote back. So did I. It wasn't everything. I want to be truthful here and not wrap this up into something cleaner than it is. Theo and I have more work to do, and I don't know how much of it he's willing to do, and I'm not waiting with held breath for an outcome I can't control. Nadine and I may never find real footing, and I've accepted that as a possibility I have to live alongside without it destroying me. But here is what I know. At 67 years old, sitting in a house I chose for myself with a garden I'm learning to tend, and a ceramics class where I've made 4 very imperfect bowls that I love completely, I am not available to be treated as optional. Not by anyone. I spent a very long time believing that keeping the peace was the same thing as having peace. It isn't. They are not even close to the same thing. Keeping the peace is about making yourself quiet so that other people's noise can continue uninterrupted. Having peace is something else entirely. It's quieter. It's yours. My husband used to say that dignity isn't something people give you. You carry it yourself or you don't carry it at all. I'm carrying it now. I put tulips on my kitchen table every week. My cat sits in the good afternoon light. My friend is coming for dinner on Friday, and I'm making the lemon cake, the one with the glaze that goes translucent when it sets right. It's mine. The recipe and the evening and the life. And I'm not sharing any of it with people who don't know what it costs.